So thank you for tuning into this episode of the Patreon podcast. Today I'm going to be discussing if United do manage to complete the Højlund deal alongside the Amrabat deal as well before the start of the season, how would I grade United's transfer window as a whole? So if we look at United's transfer business in isolation, before we talk about the other title contenders and compare them to United, I think that you would have to say so far, assuming the Rasmus Højlund deal gets completed, which it probably will now, given that Fabrizio Romano has given it the here we go, that so far United have had a pretty good transfer window. I think the upgrade from David De Gea to Andre Onana, particularly because of the style of play that Ten Hag wants to implement, is definitely an A, maybe even an A-star signing. And I think signing Onana for around £50 million from Inter Milan is going to have the same sort of impact, if not a greater impact, than the signing of Lisandro Martinez last summer. But before I go any further, remember to subscribe to the channel and check out my Patreon podcast, which will be linked below. But also, if you want cheap, good quality football jerseys for the new season or retro jerseys from the past 40 years, then check out jerseyfifa.com. A link will be in my Instagram bio, and if you use coupon code Atlantis, you should get a discount as well. I'll leave my Instagram at the top of the description and comment section, and a link will be in my Instagram bio. And so whilst Andre Onana, in my opinion, is a upgrade in terms of goalkeeping terms, in terms of his shot stopping, his cross claim and his sweeping, compared to David De Gea, the real difference obviously comes in possession. United are going to be able to play out of high pressure and exploit the space in the centre of midfield. And I think this is where players like Bruno Fernandes and Mason Mount will have massive impacts for United. And whilst I actually think that Mason Mount may play more of a water-carrying role with Casemiro and Fernandes being United's two star players in that midfield, I think Mason Mount is perfect to play that 3-8 position, pushing up high alongside Bruno Fernandes, providing the goal-scoring ability and the creative ability around the box. But if you look at that midfield three of Mason Mount and Bruno Fernandes ahead of Casemiro, it looks like a fantastic pressing midfield. I mean, certainly from a counter-pressing point of view, when United lose the ball in the opposition's half, having a midfield three of Mason Mount and Bruno Fernandes ahead of Casemiro gives you the perfect balance between pressing ability, the tenacity in the tackle, but then also when they win the ball back, all three players have goal-scoring ability. We've seen what Casemiro can offer when he's able to push forward into the box. Mason Mount and Bruno Fernandes are those goal-scoring type of midfielders, and you could easily see one of them, or maybe both of them, picking up at least 10 Premier League goals this season. And combine this with both players' creative ability, with Bruno Fernandes being one of the best in the world at playing those through balls, which works perfectly alongside Marcus Rashford, as well as Rasmus Højlund, who will be coming into the side, and Mason Mount, who I would play on the right side because of his crossing ability. And you have two players in Bruno Fernandes and Mason Mount who could probably get both 10 goals and 10 assists each in the Premier League next year. Now, of the two, I personally think it's going to be Bruno Fernandes who has a big season. I do still think that Mason Mount will put up around 15 or 16 goal involvement. But to me, I think Mason Mount will be impressive in terms of what he does out of possession, and it will be kind of like how Jorginho Wijnaldum was for Jurgen Klopp, being an integral part to Ten Hag's system. And to me, I think Mason Mount is the perfect blend between Christian Eriksen and Fred. Throughout last season, Casemiro and Bruno Fernandes were the mainstays in the midfield, and due to injury but also fatigue, Christian Eriksen was vying for his position alongside Fred. And in general, whilst Christian Eriksen is definitely the better player and had the better season, I think for a lot of big games and during big parts of the season, Fred was a much better option in midfield than Eriksen, and that was because of the energy he brought to the midfield. Whilst Christian Eriksen is fantastic in possession, being a great progressive passer but also a creator in the final third, he definitely lacks the athleticism and defensive ability that Fred provided in abundance. Now, to be honest, I certainly don't think Fred is a great defender in the middle of the park when he has large spaces to cover and he's defending in 1v1 situations, as I often feel he kind of approaches too flat-footedly, dives in and often gets beaten. However, in pressing situations where he's squeezing up the pitch in the opposition's defensive third, Fred was a massive asset for Ten Hag to have. And so that is why during big games or games where Ten Hag felt that Eriksen could potentially get outrun, Fred coming into the midfield was the first change that Ten Hag would look to make. But Mason Mount brings all the pressing ability and arguably even some better tactical intelligence than Fred, but also having the creative ability and the ball progressing ability that was often lost last season when Fred would come into the side for Eriksen. But add into this squad Kobbie Mainoo and Sofyan Amrabat, who could either come into the side to replace Casemiro in that deep single pivot position, or come into the side alongside him, creating a double pivot, and you could make the case that Ten Hag arguably has the best central midfield options of any top 6 manager. Another major problem that United had last season was replacing Casemiro when he would inevitably get suspended, as McTominay and Fred were just not up to the job, However, now with Sofian Amrabat, United have arguably one of the best defensive midfielders in Europe, a player who probably would have started for Liverpool as he did seem to be their first choice, ahead of Romeo Lavia, and he would have cost significantly less, with Lavia likely costing around 50 million, and Amrabat probably only going to cost United between 30 and 35. Kobbie Mainoo is probably playing the perfect role in the squad that you'd want for him next season. He hasn't got the pressure of being a direct replacement for anyone. I mean, Amrabat is the direct replacement for Casemiro, and for Bruno Fernandes and Mason Mount, you'd probably say that Eriksen would be the first replacement for either of them. And so looking at this midfield setup, you'd probably say that Kobbie Mainoo has got the perfect role. He can really come into the side when Ten Hag feels he's ready. He's not going to have the amount of pressure that he would have if Sofian Amrabat wasn't coming in. And so to me, replacing Fred McTominay and Donny van de Beek with Mason Mount, Amrabat and Kobbie Mainoo is an absolute massive upgrade, not just in terms of individual starting ability from Casemiro, Fernandes and Mason Mount, but now United have true strength in depth. And even if you take Casemiro out of that midfield and replace him with Amrabat, the quality level doesn't drop that much. And whilst I do expect this to be Christian Eriksen's last season, he definitely still has a role to play, coming off the bench when United need a goal, or starting certain games, maybe against the lower sides where United do need more creative ability from deep. But let's say that you could probably sell Fred for around £20 million, with both Fulham and Galatasaray reportedly interested, as well as potentially, I would imagine, some interest from Saudi Arabia. Scott McTominay is probably going to fetch around £35 million if United can sell him to another Premier League club, which at the moment does seem like it potentially will be West Ham. Donny van de Beek can surely bring in between 20 and 25 million. And Alanga having already been sold to Nottingham Forest for around 15 million, that is a total of around 90 million pounds. And with Mason Mount costing around 55 million and Amrabat likely around 35 million, United have essentially traded 4 players who you probably would regard as dead wood in this squad at the moment. And so to me the credit has to go to Ten Hag. He's not been given an open budget to go out and get whatever midfielder he wants, but you'd have to say bringing in Mount and Amrabat for a combined 85 to 90 million pounds is fantastic business in this market, considering Rice went for over 100 million, Casado's probably going to go for around 100 million as well. And so far, assuming the Amrabat and Højlund deals do get done, I'd have to give United's 2023 summer transfer window a grade A, potentially going up to a grade A star if they were able to complete one more signing, who I will be doing a separate video on.